We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam. So who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Sam Monson here with Eric Eager. Steve not here. Steve gone.
I was supposed to be here anyway.
You were a guest anyway.
But Steve's out.
Now you've been promoted. You're a headliner. You're part of the main act.
It feels good. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, apparently the entire family down with some kind of stomach virus. We've all been there, but very few of us have been there with 4 kids.
Well, not only that, but like with the Palazzolo family, it's not just you're using integers when you should be using like height, right? So like that's like 8 people worth of sickness with the Palazzolo family.
I mean, the worst thing I would imagine in that scenario is the bathroom to person ratio. You know,
yeah.
You need to be covered with a bowl for everybody, and that's in danger of getting out of control.
Steve's kids are adorable, a lot of fun. I can't imagine they are so though when they're all sick.
I don't imagine anybody is that fun when everybody's sick. So no Steve today. We'll see you back tomorrow. That's a problem for later. But for now, it's me and Eric, and Dr. Eric Eager is co-host of the PFF, the NFL Forecast. Just the
PFF forecast. Just forecast.
Just the PFF
Myself
forecast.
And the affable George Shahuri.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we Wednesday nights and Sunday late nights,
right?
As we got off the ground this week at 12 Eastern, to recap a weird NFL week, Sam. 9 underdogs winning outright, 12 of them covering the spread. Very much a very interesting week for the NFL.
Now, you guys represent really the first mathematical competency to be brought into PFF. People think of PFF as, this analytics company and at the forefront of this analytics world, which we are. But the whole thing started essentially without anybody having any kind of mathematical expertise. We did the player grading and we stitched the whole thing together. And then we promoted this as a product, as an important thing to know. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until you guys came on board and started to actually use this data to create most of the real analytical insights that we're able to now.
Yeah, at the time that PFF started, and I was not a member, but I was very much a fan. Football was still solving the what questions, right? Like, what is a good pass rusher? What is a good offensive lineman, right? We didn't have stats for offensive linemen other than games started, and that's how you got guys like Chris Chester having more Pro Football Reference approximate value in 2016 than Marshall Yanda, because you had like these weird formulas that would try to proxy for how well a lineman played based upon other things, and obviously had to come up short in many ways. I think and it's just such a treasure trove. But a lot of people are doing the what now. Like we have Next Gen Stats. We have other companies that try to collect data on every single player of every play of every game. I think what we strive to do, myself and then the folks in my team, the Timo Riskis, the Kevin Coles, the Brad Spielbergers, Ben Brown, and so forth. Like we're trying to be the so what. What does this mean? Like we see a week where all this stuff happens in the NFL, and what does that mean moving forward? Does it mean anything? A lot of times in football, we gravitate and fall in love with things that might not be all that important, or we overlook things that are. And And, I think over time we've become a little bit more intelligent about that.
And if you want to read some of those insights, you got to get yourself a PFF subscription.
You do.
See how smooth that was? I don't need Steve.
So
I can do the ad reads without him. It's fine. Week 1's in the books. All the PFF data, the grades, every single player who logged a snap is in the system, along with everybody that's logged a snap in all the years we've been grading. If you get yourself a PFF subscription, you get all of PFF's locked article content. You get the college football betting dashboards. You get our grade-powered projections, cover probabilities, betting values. You get the 0 to 100 grades on every single player, including the top rookies on every team. Player prop tool, which shows the plus-minus value for every NFL prop, and loads more. So check out the highest graded players from week 1. Look to find early value on the spread picks and player props for week 2. Dive in to your PFF subscription. Look, we don't need Steve. All right.
You were, fantastic at that. I'll take the Manscaped read though, please.
Do we even have one? I haven't checked it. That comes and goes. I'm not quite sure what the
what
the cadence
thing
is.
that Manscaped is trying to take care of. Right?
Look, I'm not going to question the way they do business. I'm just saying that sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. And I will say that when it's there, it's a happier podcast for everybody. Everybody enjoys the Manscaped read. So let's start with week 1 is always crazy. And around this time, it's like looking back, what actually meant something and what was just weird week 1 variance. So from week 1, from your perspective, what did you come away with thinking, all right, this is actually definitely different from what I thought going in?
Well, now, it might not matter all that much in the future. And in fact, I did this study for a different show I was on yesterday. If you look at season-ending record, your PFF ELO power ranking, or whatever power ranking you want to use, they're all basically correlated with each other. That matters a lot more than the change in your power ranking from week 1 to week 2. So a lot of times, like we love, we love the game. There's a lot to love about the game. There's nothing wrong with talking about what happened. The issue is a lot of times it's, like last year, week 1, what did we have? We had an 11-5 Browns team get blown out in week 1. We had, who else lost week 1? We had an 11-5 Colts team lose outright to what ended up being a 1-15 Jacksonville team.
Right.
There were a few other 10-win or more teams that got blown out or lost in week 1 of last season. The Tampa Bay Bucks won the Super Bowl, lost week 1 in convincing fashion.
Remember the
New
first
Orleans.
couple of weeks last year, it was like the Patriots are going to be great. Cam Newton's dominating. Like, this is fantastic. Don't worry about it. They stomped Miami. And then, obviously, that fell apart.
Yeah, and so in that respect, I'm going to say, don't take as much out of it as you want. But there were some thematic things about this week that I thought was interesting, and one of them is, if you can find mismatches in the trenches, they, I think, can carry at least for that 1 week. So, for example, Philadelphia, skill position players played fine on Sunday, but I don't think they're going to be great, at least this season. Jalen Hurts played a good game, although his average depth of target was less than 4 yards. Defense, I don't think they're going to be great in the secondary, but they played fine in week 1. But they had a sizable advantage against Atlanta in the trenches, and they pressed it continuously, and they won that game. The Green Bay Packers against New Orleans Saints, I called the Green Bay Packers run defense on the live show gooey. They very much lived up to gooiness in giving up I believe it was 177 on the ground to the Saints. And then that obviously left Jameis Winston with some layups to exploit. I think that matchup is always going to hurt Green Bay. I always think Green Bay is going to look soft against tough teams, but that doesn't mean Green Bay can't win the division. In fact, Green Bay, after this week, a week in which all 4 NFC North teams went winless, they became more favored to win the North in the betting markets, despite having probably the worst performance of the 4 teams. So, Cleveland, for example, week 1 probably doesn't tell me anything about Cleveland negatively, even though all the consequences are going to be negative, right? If they want to be the 1 seed in the AFC, they have a sizable handicap now by having a 1 loss to Kansas City, but they were a fantastic team. So those are kind of things that stuck out to me. Buffalo, you had the regression with Allen. In Los Angeles, you did not have the regression with Herbert. In fact, Herbert did more random ass shit in that game than he did last season, where he was so great under pressure.
The funny thing with Allen, though, is so he was okay in that game. It looked a lot more like old Josh Allen before last year, but then so did Josh Allen in week 1 last year. Like Josh Allen week 1 last year had a grade of like 65 against the Jets, and it wasn't until like the next 3 weeks where he went on this run of like 90 plus grades.
But wasn't he efficient in that game? Like Josh Allen wasn't good in our system, and he wasn't good in real life either. Like, not to say our system isn't real life, but you know what I'm saying? Like his underlying data, he certainly emerged in our eyes later in the season, but them from a football, like it was his first 300-yard game in the NFL all time last year.
And he was accurate. I'm just saying there are a lot of sort of comparisons between week 1. Like it's easy to look at week 1 this year and be like, I see, there's the regression. Like we told you he was never going to be at this 90, but again, week 1 last year he wasn't either.
And the Steelers eat their Wheaties on defense. Like they're not a terrible defense
certainly nobody was coming out of week 1 last year and it's like, oh, look at this seismic jump forward from Josh Allen. Eat your words, everybody that said he wasn't a good quarterback. It wasn't until like the next few weeks we were like, oh, wow, is this actually for real? Is this going to be a thing this year?
Yeah, I think that's true. And the fantasy football people, I think, were more on it because he, threw for 312, ran for 57, 3 total touchdowns. But like from a fundamental football standpoint, it probably wasn't until, maybe that San Francisco game that they played in Arizona last year where he really sort of like, made that offense unstoppable. And obviously the Pittsburgh game, where especially in the second half, he was fantastic throwing to Stephon Diggs. That just didn't materialize Sunday. And you have to be worried if you're Buffalo because I don't know. So here's a question. What did you take from the Miami-New England game? Because I clearly think New England should have won the game. I think they're the better team. I had some bets on Miami and the under, so I was happy because it ended up being okay. But watching that game back, I very much felt lucky that ended up being the outcome.
Yeah.
Do you think that those were two teams that were a class below the good teams in the AFC, just playing a close game?
Yeah.
Or were they two teams that were good teams playing a close game, and now Miami has kind of a nice leg up on the whole division having won?
If I'm one of the best teams in the AFC, I'm not scared by either of those teams, but I think they're both pretty good sides. Like, I do think that New England, they were definitely unfortunate to win that game. Everyone's coming out of it saying, Mac Jones only had 16 points and the numbers aren't there. Like after the first couple of snaps, he looked ridiculous. Like he almost did like this Aaron Brooks thing of like spinning in a circle and throwing the ball backwards when he got pressured in the first couple of snaps. It looked absurd. And then all of a sudden it was like he settled down and realized, you know what, hang on, we're done. That was, I don't know what happened there. It was like a weird spasm, but now I'm in the groove. And then he started to look good. He was driving for the win. He should have had his first, game-winning drive in the NFL, but didn't, so we're kind of overlooking it. I still think the Patriots with Mac Jones are going to be pretty good this year, especially if their running backs don't fumble the ball away on a constant basis.
He looked every bit. I thought he looked every bit the part, and moving around nicely in the pocket. He's not a statue back there.
Right.
I liked what I saw. James White is back into the fold after a year of being a guy who kind of was lost in the shuffle. He has always, to me, been one of the most valuable running backs in the NFL. He showed that in spades a little bit. Jacoby Myers is fine. You saw some athleticism out of Jonnu Smith, which is sorely missed by the tight ends last year. That was fantastic. Think about this, though, again. How crazy is this? So we talked about this on the live show Sunday, which you should watch this Sunday if you want to preview NFL Week 2. Miami last season was 25th in yards per play allowed, like one spot ahead of the Raiders, a team that everybody thought is terrible defense. But, of course, they were first in turnovers generated per drive. They gave up 5.6 yards per play against New England, but gets 2 immaculate turnovers at key spots to sort of win that game. At some point in the betting markets, fading Miami is going to be profitable. Does it start this week with Buffalo? Buffalo still, this is a very respectful line for Buffalo after what we saw with some fundamental flaws week. They're laying 3.5 against the Dolphins on the road this week. I still don't think the market respects the Dolphins, and I think that's probably rational.
Yeah, if I'm Buffalo, I'm not massively scared by either of these two teams either. The interesting thing, though, comes after week 2, where all of a sudden, 1 week, anything can happen. You get weird results, and being 0-1 is nothing, right? But all of a sudden, 0-2, particularly when the losses come at the expense of some other teams in your division, suddenly you have a problem. If you're Buffalo and you lose this week, now Miami's jumped ahead by 2. And if you're Baltimore as well, all of a sudden you're 0-2 with Cleveland, Pittsburgh potentially running away.
Oh, but even think about this. If you're the AFC South, Colts are at home this week. They're now, I bet them at +4. They're +3.5 against the Rams. Very decent chance they'll go 0-2.
Yeah.
And the Tennessee Titans, fresh off of, and I got to explain that, like, if you looked at our simulation tool last week, like yesterday for 3 hours or so, there was a time which Tennessee went from having a projected 9.5 wins in week 1 to 5.5 wins. And the reason is our model game to game really weighs offensive play caller ranking. And Todd Downing through 1 week, like, somehow broke the system. He was so bad. He was like 11 standard deviations below average as a play caller. And I literally have never seen that before. So I had, like, Timo, like a bunch of people in my group message me like, hey, what's up with Tennessee? And I'm like, shit. Because, like, when I look at the rankings, I'm like, oh, the top teams look good. The bottom teams look good.
Literally
it all makes sense.
Model.
And then Tennessee's out there, like, with, and I look and it's Todd Downing, who I think we all thought was going to be bad. But my goodness. And now, so we corrected, of course. Now Tennessee's projected about 8 wins, which I think is fair given how they played. Yeah. And they're 5.5-point underdogs in Seattle. Seattle, by the way, in a weird week, played a remarkably normal game for Seattle. I'm
so mad when, what was the news that made me do it? The Carson Wentz thing, right? When Carson Wentz had the foot thing, I was like, this is 6 to 12 weeks or whatever. I immediately put money on Jacksonville to win the division. I should have put money on Houston to win the division. We'd have been live. I was like, if there's a few people somewhere with, like, Houston for the AFC South tickets that must be laughing after week 1. Particularly, like, it may only last week 1, but now when you're looking at, like, who people are playing in week 2, you're like, that might last a couple of weeks.
I mean, so yeah, because there's a very good chance that both Indianapolis and Tennessee go into their matchup in week 3, both 0-2.
Right.
For our money, I think it's going to be the Colts, and I'm not a huge fan of I'm a huge fan of the way the Colts do a lot of things. I think where it counts the most, they've hit on some bad luck, right? Yeah. Quarterback, T.Y. Hilton was really their only good receiver. Pascal and Pittman are fine, but, like, the Colts weirdly found themselves in a position where they hit on a lot of good players at non-premium positions, which has stuck them in a bind at places like corner and wide out.
They were
quarterback.
They're a really interesting team in terms of how they're constructing this roster, because they are clearly quite a smart franchise overall, right?
Yeah, especially in game. I think that they do a really good job in game. And
they've been drafting really well relative to other people. Whatever the variance is there in terms of how sustainable long-term, a long-term edge in drafting just better than other people is, they have been doing it really well recently. But all of the hits and all of the resources in terms of second contracts have gone into these non-premium positions. At some point, that has to be a problem, right? Like, you can't keep giving all the money to the guard and the linebacker and all these sort of non-premium spots without sort of balancing it out by making some real home runs at, like, legitimately premium positions. Like, if they don't draft like either a quarterback or a number 1 corner or a wide receiver that's a superstar in the next couple of years, they're in trouble, right? They can't.
Yeah, but you can't hit on those draft picks if you don't make them. And, like, the hard part is, so you look at the 2018 season when they got the bounty of picks for the Sam Darnold trade, their top 2 picks were guard, linebacker, and they're both home runs. Nelson and Leonard. Braden Smith was a guard who's now a right tackle. They at least, like, extracted him from a very low value position to an okay at right tackle. Their top 3 picks all deserve contract extensions, and of course, like, this is also one of the leaks in the NFL, which is general managers, like, rewarding themselves when they reward players with contracts. It's a trophy. Look at me. Look how well I drafted. But then, in that draft, you also went, Nyheim Hines in the 4th round. They gave him a draft. They gave him a contract as well. But then in subsequent drafts, you're looking at, not having a first-round pick, using your first-round pick in 2020 on a defensive tackle into DeForest Buckner, who's, again, one of the best players in the NFL at his position, but not at a premium position. Jonathan Taylor, second-round pick, not a premium position. Safety, Julian Blackmon, not a premium position. And then this past year, at least, in round 1, they went ahead with Kwity Paye, who does play a premium position. But as you said, like, you're taking a lot fewer gambles at those premium positions than other teams, and your likelihood, therefore, of hitting on a few of them, which is what you need, is lower.
I want to get into some emails that we've been sent, but first, I got to give a shout out to our friends at Fantrax. Eric, Fantrax is free fantasy football league manager. It's the most customizable, easy to use, and feature-rich platform in the entire industry. PFF is playing our leagues on Fantrax this season. They have multi-team trades. They've got bonus points for touchdowns of different yardages. Create a free account now using promo code PFF at fantrax.com/PFF and get a chance to win a trip to any regular season game this year for you and your entire league, plus $6,000. That's a pretty good deal. Where would you want to go? That's promo code PFF at fantrax.com/PFF. Now, we have been getting emails sent into us, NFL podcast singular at PFF.com. And I'm a big fan of them because some are just like little comments, some are, ideas that we could talk about, segment type things. We've been talking about this idea of quarterback. Everybody's shooting for the new Patrick Mahomes, right? That's what you're aiming for when you come to quarterbacks. But we have been using this term, the Matt Ryan inflection point, right? When you rank quarterbacks, that's your line.
Yep.
If you get a guy that's better than Matt Ryan has been throughout his career, you're golden. If it's below that, you now enter this murky gray area of...
And we're talking about Ryan circa like 17.
Yeah,
not 16,
right.
But not the washed
Not
version of it
MVP
now.
Ryan, not bad Ryan, the usual one. And if you're like a little bit below that, you're in that weird world of, well, do we want to commit the big money contract to this guy? Anyway, somebody called... hang on. Yeah, here we go. Somebody called Ricardo Zuppelli. Nice. Emailed in saying, "Greetings, sirs. Huge fan of what you guys do, but this recent Matt Ryan-related term seems to touch wordy. Would the Ryan Rubicon not be a more alliterative and easier on the tongue?" What do you think about that as a man that has to name things like this?
I like it. I don't know if you saw my tweets last night, but I also I called it the Kirk Club, which is like the group but right beneath.
Those are the guys just below the Ryan inflection
you're talking
point.
about like Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins himself, Jared Goff possibly. I think some people hate Goff so much they don't even want him in that group.
Right.
Tannehill. I said Tannehill had the Kirkiest of Kirk games on Sunday. But I do like it. I like thinking about quarterbacks in those tiers because it's hard, right? Because like take Ryan, for example. Ryan is probably not good enough to win a championship with at price.
Right.
And the bar is different depending upon whether or not you're on a rookie deal or whether you're on a veteran deal. The veteran deal means that you not only have to be a good quarterback by yourself, you have to be a good quarterback who elevates players around you.
That's the important thing.
Because otherwise, and this is one of the reasons I look at like wins above replacement per dollar spent, not on just quarterback, but on quarterback, wide receiver, O-line, tight end, because we know that quarterbacks protect their offensive line, especially the good ones. You watch Patrick Mahomes Sunday with that revamped offensive line, and I actually was extremely impressed with not how that O-line played, but how intentional Pat was about the space that he used up in the pocket. I thought for the first time in his career, that was the best he's ever played in the pocket, in my opinion. And that's why, and so he makes a lot of money, but guess what? The right side of the Chiefs offensive line is a bunch of players on rookie deals who've never played a snap before. Right. If you can make those guys average by virtue of being great, then I'll pay you whatever you want. If you are like Kirk Cousins, who individually is good, who, when you look at stats like CPOE, by the throw he's making, he does well over expectation, but he doesn't elevate the play of those around him. Like, I'm just not going to pay him anything. Like, and when the guy's on a rookie deal, it doesn't matter because you can pay $16 million for Sammy Watkins, guaranteeing you a good third option as a wide receiver. You can pay up for, like DeAndre Hopkins in the case of Arizona because you're paying Kyler hardly anything. Like, though, it's very, and I think tiering quarterbacks that way is an important way to think about it. Like, if you're a Kirk on a rookie deal, I can win a Super Bowl with you. If you're a Kirk on a Kirk deal, I can't win a Super Bowl with you.
It's why that line, I think, is really important, because if you're above that line, we can start talking about how high we push your money, because you make other people better. But if you're not sure that guy does that, it's a whole different question. So let me read you this email, because I think this is an interesting way of looking at this whole discussion. Who's this? Jean-Paul Hang on, he told me how to pronounce his name. Jean-Paul Veilleux, just spelled Veilleux.
Nice.
Says, all right, I know I'm late responding to last Thursday's podcast, but I wanted to touch on something you guys are talking about how teams should be chasing elite quarterbacks because most of the Super Bowl winning teams in the last 20 years have been helmed by those elite guys. He understands the point about how the numbers seem to indicate that you need an elite quarterback to win a Super Bowl, so logically you want to try and land one of these guys on your team. However, the number you guys didn't bring up was 450. Because in the last 20 years, teams have started over 450 different quarterbacks. And while that includes quarterbacks that have started on multiple different teams, even if you strip out the duplicates, there's still a ton of guys. So if you include the Bradys, Mannings, Brees, Rodgers, Mahomes, etc., you can sprinkle in a few others, and that might still give you 10 to 15 elite quarterbacks in the last 20 years out of 450 guys. It seems to me that the smart money is on the fact that it's highly improbable that you'll ever land one of those guys, a little bit better than a 3% chance, and that the higher percentage play is to assemble a good enough team that an above average quarterback and a good bit of luck will be enough to get you to the promised land.
There's nothing wrong with that statement. I will say the hard part is a couple things, right? Assembling a great roster in the NFL is less about superstars and more about depth.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to have great depth in the NFL unless you are lucky or you are allocating resources to depth. The only way that you have great resources to allocate to depth is if you take a swing at the quarterback in the draft. And that's kind of where it comes back to. Because, like, I agree, the issue in a lot of these instances is that we talk about quarterbacks, okay, this is the 10th best quarterback. How much different can the guy be than the first best quarterback?
Right.
Well, I'll tell you. Tom Brady last year, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, the two most valuable quarterbacks in the NFL, both were worth about 5 wins above replacement. Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins were 10 and 11. They were worth about 2.5. So you're talking about, and for quarterbacks, it's about $10 million per win. So Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers are worth $50 million, right? And so at both of their contracts, in the case of Brady, it's $25 million. He's generating $25 million of surplus value you can either realize on the field, which is what they do, or in the case of a rookie quarterback, allocate to other players. Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr, like when they give you 2.5 wins, that's $25 million. That's about what they make, right? So, and to me, again, that just means you don't have any room for error. And so when I hear something like that, I think to myself, well, it's a lot easier said than done to building a great roster.
And particularly, you have to think about in terms of time spans as well,
yes.
Right? Like you get Mahomes, you can sign into the $500 million contract, and he's now locked in for the next decade. You have Mahomes for a decade. Your Super Bowl window just opened for an entire decade of play. How easy is it to not only assemble a championship caliber roster, but to keep it intact for a couple of years? It's almost impossible. Like teams like Jacksonville or Minnesota, or there's been a bunch of teams in recent years that have gotten close to that point where that roster became really, really good, right up to the point where they almost made it, and then almost immediately it fell apart. Like they got it together for 1 year. Yeah. To keep a Super Bowl roster like that together for a decade is just not even possible. The other point I would make is that, like, how many truly quarterback-proof, quote-unquote, teams have there been in the last 20 years? If we're saying there have been 10 to 15 elite quarterbacks over that time, the 2000 Ravens, the 2002 Bucks, the Broncos team with Manning, his second ring.
That's probably the last one, right?
That's it, right? 3. So 3 of those teams in the last 20 years versus 10 to 15 quarterbacks.
I mean, and that's part of like the birthday problem thing too. I talked to you guys about this. Like there's a cute little problem in probability theory that says like if you're in a room with 23 people, there's better than a 50% chance that 2 of you share a birthday,
right?
Which seems kind of odd.
Breaks everybody's brain.
Yeah, breaks everybody's brain.
But mathematical.
The key part about it is you don't know the 2 people, right? So weird things happen. And I say this to fan bases. I know I'm a buzzkill, but like weird things happen, but they're not that likely to happen the way you want them to happen.
Predictably,
exactly,
in a certain direction.
Because it's actually like less than 10% chance that person anybody in that room of 23 shares your birthday,
right? Which is the number that everybody thinks of in their brain.
Exactly. So Yes, there eventually emerge teams that are quarterback proof. Like they bubble up, right? And they do in weird ways. Because that 2015 Broncos team was elite because of Manning, and then randomly because of Chris Harris Jr.'s of the world and some truly good players on that side of the ball, but also some players you didn't expect to be good to be great. They popped up, right? And they end up winning a Super Bowl as a quarterback proof team. They also didn't design it that way.
Right.
And so the fact that there are quarterback-proof teams that can win doesn't mean you should design your team that way. Like the tried and true, there's two tried and true ways of winning in the NFL. One of them is to already have an elite quarterback and to do your best to build around him given what he makes. Or, and this is the only way to get to this position in the first place, you draft a quarterback and either he becomes elite and then you're a long-term winner, or you're smart about him for the first 4 years and you can do what the Rams and the Eagles and the Seahawks and those teams build around him, win Super Bowls while he's inexpensive, and then figure it out after that. The figuring it out after that part is actually, to me, the most compelling problem in all of football. Whether or not that guy who's good enough, say like Mayfield, whether the guy that's good enough to get you 11-5 when he's cheap is good enough to keep you at 11-5 when he's rich.
I think that ultimately is the problem that everybody's shooting for now. It's like, okay, if you have a Mahomes, to a degree that it's easy, right? You know that guy's locked in place. He gives you a ton of flexibility with a bunch of other things, and it's just kind of juggling how the pieces fit around him. If you don't have Mahomes and you don't have the Broncos team that dragged Manning to a second Super Bowl, now it's like, well, how do we juggle this? We have a quarterback that's pretty good. It's stressing us enough when it comes to like juggling the rest of the roster because he can't do what Mahomes can do. But how good do we need to be before he can actually go on that kind of run and challenge a guy like Mahomes? And the Browns are right in that. That's literally the discussion that they're having this season is if they were certain he was in that category, if he was above the Ryan Rubicon, if they were certain he was above that, they'd have paid him already. They'd have given him the Josh Allen contract, and we wouldn't be talking about it. They're not. They're leaving it this year and seeing how it plays out and getting more data and saying, okay, this is as good as the team's going to get around Baker Mayfield. If he can't, take us to a Super Bowl, or like at least if he can't play well enough that we're confident that not just whether we make it or not this year, next year we're in the discussion, now we have to start talking about whether we re-sign him.
100%. I think the Ravens are also dealing with it too with Lamar. I think there's a little bit of confounders there in the sense that he didn't get vaccinated until just recently, but they're doing the exact same thing. And this is a player who's won an MVP in this league, right? Yeah. That's how and I talked about the Indianapolis Colts, the problem, everybody says, oh, it's a good problem to have to draft good players. Well, I mean, it is, but there are very few teams that will stare a good player in the eye at a non-premium position and say, it's been fun. Yeah. The Ravens are like really the only team, like C.J. Mosley, for example, Matthew Judon, although they gave him a tag, but like, and edge is a premium position. I don't think it is for the Ravens as much as it is for other teams.
Because of the way they scheme pressure. Yeah.
But that is really like the difficulty, right? And that's why, when we do draft analysis and we do roster construction analysis, we say don't draft non-premium positions high, because ultimately if those guys are good, you will have to pay them, because no team has had, except for the Ravens in a couple of small circumstances, no teams have had the guts to sort of move on.
This is, I can't remember where I read this, but somebody was saying that the biggest problem Dallas has is that when you look at their roster construction, it's all their own guys. They don't bring in all these free agents. They reward monster contracts for guys that they actually draft. And it's like, when Tyron Smith and Dak Prescott, okay, fine, that makes perfect sense. But it's exactly what you said. It's like this self-congratulatory reward of, well, look, Zeke Elliott was good. We told you he was going to be good, so we're going to give him
a trophy.
We're going to give him the $90 million contract. It vindicates everybody's work, and we don't make the hard decision, which is, okay, we did the right thing. We made the right.
We evaluated a player as good, and he ended up being good.
We made the correct player evaluation in terms of analyzing that he would be a good player, but the value ceases at the point where we have to pay him the giant amount of money. So we have to move on, even though we got it right. The fact that we got it right means we can do it again. Means we shouldn't pay him. Not that we reward everybody in the process by giving him the deal.
Yeah, and it's so hard because in most cases you're paying for what a player has done. Like, think about Josh Allen even. Josh Allen is, what, $43 million APY now? $43 million APY is about what he generated last year. So when you make that contract, you are essentially saying,
I need that guy every year.
I need that guy every year. And I don't think it's fair to Josh Allen to assume that out of him. It's why the Mahomes deal, for example, is a brilliant one. It's why Brady taking less. You know, the Brady taking less thing is a little overblown, but on average, it's true. So Brady taking less over time really did, like, it really was a fundamental understanding of why things happen. I talked about this in that Nora Princiati article, which was, I looked at the Orlando Brown trade as negative EV. I looked at the Joe Thuney signing as negative EV. But when you add it in with the Patrick Mahomes contract, which is you're getting a steal all the time. Even last year where he was a little down, talking about 4 wins above replacement. So even at $25 million a year, that's a $15 million surplus value. That's a lot, right? So if you overpay Joe Thuney by $4 or $5 million, you're just paying yourself back, right?
And that contract is such a fascinating one because it's locked in for a decade.
Yes,
you have like the accounting done. Well, but for the next 10 years, you know what money you're going to have to play with.
And that's also the important point about rookie quarterback contracts too, because when we were talking about New England and whether they should start Cam or whether they should start Mac Jones, it wasn't about what they cost now. It's if Mac Jones blows up and becomes a great quarterback this year, he can't go back to the table and be
same
like,
money.
I want more money.
Yeah.
If Cam would have had an MVP season, you're kind of screwed because you're going to have to pay him. And again, like, I don't think teams realize that what that edge is. And Mahomes really just gave the Chiefs a different version of that with a deal that was that long, and hence they're eventually going to have to pay up, right?
Yeah,
there's going to be some point where there's a year where, you know, they have to pay him way more than what he's being making a lot of these other years. But that might be a year where they're just playing with house's money with luck. The crazy thing about the Chiefs, other than the Mahomes draft pick, they've sucked at drafting since he's been on the team, and they had the Frank Clark deal too, which is an albatross, right? Like,
there's a lot of bad personnel moves that have gone
you can
into the Chiefs,
imagine
and it doesn't matter
if the cards start flipping over good for them. Like, they might have a year where they're like, okay, Pat, this is going to be the year we unload $60 million on you, and we're just not going to get another free agent. But you can tell we built a nice little roster for you. You know, this is the year.
That's what, like, having an elite quarterback is so fascinating in terms of the dynamics. I want to hit on one more in a second, but before that, we got one more ad read to break into. I didn't have a segue. I just had to hit it. I couldn't find one. I thought there was going to be like a first line of the ad was going to give me a way in. No. Week 1 may be over, but the season's just getting started at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. To kick off Week 2, DraftKings is giving new customers $200 in free bets instantly when they bet $1 on any football game. Listen up, because you don't want to miss this. Head to the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and place a bet of $1 on any Week 2 game to receive $200 in free bets instantly. If Sportsbook is not yet available in your state, DraftKings still has huge cash prizes up for grabs all season long with their daily fantasy contests. DraftKings is giving all new customers a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes with their first deposit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code PFF to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet at any football game. That's promo code PFF this week at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Now, this is the real bit, right? Steve is a master at the terms and conditions. The dude can fly through them like it's nothing. I'm going to give it a shot. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit and $1 wager required. One per customer. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT.
I'm more of a 1-800-9-WITH-IT guy than
Yeah. How did you like the terms and conditions?
Sam, you did fantastic. I would have never known that
Steve was the terms and conditions guy.
I would have never known.
That's all I'm shooting for. If we can just get a seamless transition between Steve and me.
It's like when a left guard, you know, like when a left guard's injured and they put another guy, and, you know, John Madden's like, well, we haven't heard his name the whole time.
Right.
Like it's perfect. Like it's
if it doesn't bring attention to you, you've done it well. That's perfect. That's all I'm shooting for. Okay, one more email. This one was sent from Kevin Oyer, Oyer. Let's go with Oyer. I want your guys' thoughts on if the Seattle Seahawks ceiling is lower with Pete Carroll's run-first and defense-focused mindset. Would it actually be better for the team to have an offensive-minded head coach? Huge fan of the pod, yada, yada, yada. So this is an interesting one because Russell Wilson, I think, presents very unique challenges or facets to that whole quarterback elite dynamic and how that affects the team, right?
Yeah.
Seattle's roster is not particularly good right now. But they have Russell Wilson, so we assume that they're still going to be right up there at the top of that division. That's the best division in football right now. And as much as Pete Carroll keeps taking these hammer blows over this insistence publicly that they want to run the ball more, they want all this kind of stuff. Pete Carroll is clearly a good head coach and can coach a team. But where does all that land? I'm really interested in the idea of, because of the way Russell Wilson plays the game in this unique way of holding onto the ball a long time, making a lot of his own pressure, like this offseason, little temper tantrum of I'm tired of getting hit. It's you're responsible for half of that hit.
You're wearing the hot dog suit.
Yeah. So, but that's also the reason he does what he does, right? Russell Wilson drops back, runs around a little bit, takes a hit, but drops a rainbow to Tyler Lockett, and it's a touchdown. That is part of what makes him so great. So I'm interested in this dynamic of what is the best way of maximizing Russell Wilson?
Well, Gabe Kapler, who's the manager of the NL leading San Francisco Giants, when he was the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies, I think one of the best quotes I heard from him was saying, look, all of these analytical things give you a edge, 1 or 2% edge. In fact, the reason why people like me are annoying on Twitter fourth down decisions is because they're the one thing that can give you a 5% edge, right? All these other things are 1 or 2%, right? 1 or 2%. And he made a claim that, and I don't know necessarily if you can support it, but it does pass the sniff test to me, which is I can put a player in the lineup in one position and it will, in theory, give me a 2% edge. But if it takes away his comfort in playing the game, it might eliminate it or reverse it altogether. And if we're going to agree with your premise, which is that Pete Carroll is a good coach, and I think, again, I have to do this study. I actually should do this study. But I do, in my intuition suggests that players play better for Pete Carroll than they would for another team. Okay. I think that there's some sort of coaching. There's some sort of Dennis Green had this. Mike Tice had this for the Vikings, where players who were nobodies played okay football for them, and I think that has value. There is no question that Pete Carroll tactically leaves win percentage on the field all the time. Fourth down decisions, running too much. Just stuff like that, right? Running the ball too much and the fourth down decisions, I think they're the chief among them. But if Seattle believes that Carroll is a elevator in one way, the best thing for them to do is what I believe they've done this year, which is you put Shane Waldron in, you have an offense that is nominally run first, but it does so in probably the most effective way for the way that Russell Wilson likes to play football, which is, the outside zone stuff, the stretch play action stuff, the down the field shots, all the characteristics of a McVay system, I think marry better with Russell Wilson than a traditional offense and coincide philosophically, even if he doesn't know it. Even if it's through the back door, with what Pete Carroll wants to be as a coach, which is run first, establish all this stuff. So my long-winded answer is, if they see value in Carroll, which they clearly do, and there could be evidence that he has value in some places, let's minimize the downside of doing some of the things he likes to do that are bad.
Or let's sort of almost get it in through the back door of we're going to start adding the smart things to this offense just in such a way that you don't see them happening or don't can't immediately throw a roadblock in the way of them.
Because that was a crazy game on Sunday. Again, they never play games outside of one score ever. And they handled Indianapolis on the road in a game that they were playing at 10 o'clock their own time. Like,
I think there is definitely something to this idea of playing for a guy, whether it's the head coach or whether it's the quarterback as well, I think is a big one. Like, there's definitely a level of, and this is where, like, Cam Newton came out and did that weird ass interview. Was it with his dad? Where he was talking about, like, basically, like, the reason they didn't want me there is because, you know, you can't have a Cam Newton sitting there and people would gravitate towards me.
Which I actually kind of agree with.
Which is, it's a point other people were made. Doug Kyed was making that point as well. It's one of the reasons they got rid of him. Cam, not Doug Kyed. That, look, there is an aura about this guy. Like, and that's one of the reasons why he's always had these sort of evangelical Cam for Hall of Fame, you know, supporters and all this kind of thing. But there is something to the idea that people will play harder for a guy who has that, whatever that is. And, you know, when I did the sort of research on Joe Montana for the podcast episode we did, like the number of games where it's like Montana, you know, executes this incredible comeback from a game in which he'd thrown like 3 picks in the first quarter. Yeah. But at no point was anybody ever doubting that Montana would get it done at the end.
I mean, that Super Bowl against the Bengals, he was terrible most of the game. Yeah.
But like, it didn't matter how many big screw ups he had. When they were interviewing Ronnie Lott or whoever it was, he was like, "Oh yeah, you know, once we got the ball back for Joe, we knew it was."
But even think about that team to what you're talking about. Steve Young was a $40 million quarterback in the USFL. I know it was annuity, but like, you know, backing up Montana, and that 88 team that won the Super Bowl against, you know, Chris's Bengals was like in shambles until Bill Walsh was like, because he was like playing them against each other. He thought that would bring out the best in both of them. And like with like 5 games left in the season, they were like 6-6 or something. And he's like, no, I'm playing Joe the rest of the season. I got to make a decision here. I think Mike Holmgren pushed him to do it, by the way, which I think is a low-key, like Mike Holmgren deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. And then they went like 5-0 or 5-1 down the stretch, run through the NFC and win a Super Bowl. And there is part of that, like backup quarterback has to be like, because a lot of these players grew up, and rightfully so, idolizing Cam. And he's still like an Adonis-looking guy. Like having him as a backup quarterback, and you know, there are other aspects to this that I don't think are great, and we should be able to have backup quarterbacks who are alphas in the locker room. But like the reality of the situation is, it might, like if Mac plays poorly in a couple games, there's probably a lot of Cam Newton fans as kids who are like, why aren't we playing Cam? He's amazing.
I think ultimately Mac Jones has that as well. Like maybe not right now or the same degree, but he will develop the same kind of aura of they're going to play for him. But it's. I think it's interesting to there's no way of knowing what kind of power that has. But did you see as well the clip during the week of Von Miller talking to Teddy, where he's like, you know, we haven't had a guy, just these little pep talks, you know, on the sideline, the stuff you see where you get the mic'd up clips and the quarterback's walking down, he's just giving a couple of words to the offensive line or the receivers or the defense, and it in your brain it's like, I mean, that's pointless, it's meaningless, like, it's irrelevant. Like Von Miller, one of the best pass rushers of all time, is telling Teddy that those little pep talks, like, they actually make a difference. It registers. And he was like, you know, we haven't had a guy here that gave us that feeling since Peyton Manning. So from the outside, you're looking at this like Drew Lock versus Teddy Bridgewater. And like, I mean, is there much difference between the two? In which case, you might as well go for Lock, who might have a higher ceiling. But from the inside, there's definitely something to this idea of they're going to play harder for Teddy because of that stuff, because of the irrelevant stuff.
Well, I said that, you remember when Mike Zimmer like could not lose a game against the spread for like 2 years? Yeah. And everybody's like, oh, Mike Zimmer's a great, you know, now they're 0-8 in their last 8 against the spread. And you look back, you're like, oh wait, maybe Teddy Bridgewater, Teddy Bridgewater was 5-0 against the spread in New Orleans. Last year they were 5-10 when he started games, but like I think they were above 500 against the spread when Teddy Bridgewater has always been underestimated. He's always like sort of emerged above that. And, you know, he's not like I compare him to Jim McMahon, right? Jim McMahon was like a skinny quarterback who got hurt a lot, who didn't have the greatest arm, but he also like won 27 straight starts once, you know, and like players played around him. He facilitated a Super Bowl winning team with a great defense. And even though they weren't an efficient offense, people like played hard for him. Like there's never going to be a game, I feel like, where, and we've seen this, where a team has an amazing defense and they have a horrible offense, and the defense like it hates the offense. If Bridgewater's the quarterback, like he does these little things like He doesn't turn it over. He does these little things like he runs for 5 yards on 3rd and 8 to put the defense in better position on the punt, right? He does like weird stuff like that I agree. Like, I think, there are clearly better quarterbacks than him in the NFL that don't win as much. And I wonder if there's something about, the little things he does because like that was like always the case with McMahon too. Like his statistics were terrible. And like, but he literally won like 70% of his starts. And it was always, you go back and watch his games and you're like, oh yeah, I guess if I was a defender, I'd like the fact that he stayed in bounds there and took another minute off the clock before, and I feel like there's also plays where Bridgewater like is really good with his feet, that he extends plays. The touchdown to Albert O was an amazing play where if I'm a defender, I'm thinking, this guy's giving me way more than maybe his talent would suggest. And I do think that adds some value.
All right, 2 more things I want to hit on before we wrap this up. If you are one of the people that were talking about the Matthew Stafford plus Los Angeles Rams and Sean McVay equals Super Bowl this year, you come out of Sunday Night Football like taking victory laps and running around going, see, told you. How do you think that whole thing's going to work out?
So we talked about quarterbacks. We talked about trying to get over the Ryan thing. I said there's 2 ways to get an elite quarterback. You draft one and develop him and he becomes great, or you already had a great one to begin with. I did nowhere in this is how you get an elite quarterback did I say you take an albatross of a contract in Jared Goff, package picks with him, and get a quarterback who's pretty good.
Who's never been above that line.
Yeah. So obviously I'm willing to be wrong, and we're wrong all the time. We were wrong about Josh Allen last year at least. We're wrong about Justin Herbert, I think. I think collectively we did not see the tail of Mahomes' distribution. Like there's plenty. So I could certainly be wrong here. But when I watched Sunday night's game, I saw a defense in the Los Angeles Rams that had 2 good players and a bunch of kind of just whatevers out there. I saw a team that I think intentionally gives up plays in the run game, which I think is positive EV most games. But if you get behind, I don't know if they, when we saw the Green Bay game in the playoffs, when they got behind, they were just unable to come back. And then on the offensive side of the ball, Stafford has always started well when circumstances change, right? 2011 was really the first year
That's a great way of saying that, actually.
When 2011 was his first year starting in the NFL, and when Jim Schwartz was the coach, and they made the playoffs, he had like 30 touchdown passes in the first 10 starts. And then remember, he had the thumb injury. He's wearing gloves. He didn't look great. And then he kind of petered off.
The number of different times that the articles have been written about,
correct,
like, somebody's saved Matthew Stafford.
Jim Caldwell. He takes Jim Caldwell to 11-5, and then by 2015 he gets Mike Lombardi fired. Then Jim Bob Cooter is like the next. He and Jim Bob Cooter, and then Calvin Johnson retires, and we're writing articles about, wow, it's a new Matt, because they had the 8 come from behind wins in 2016, Calvin Johnson's first year in retirement. So it's like, oh, he's a new quarterback now. And then he gets all those coaches fired. And then they go with Darrell Bevell. And going into 2020, we're all like, look how great Matt Stafford was with Darrell Bevell. And he always gets found out.
It always just goes back to Matthew Stafford.
Yeah. And I will agree, broadly, Detroit's dysfunctional. And so I get where people are like, okay, now he's out of Detroit, he's got a chance. But you look at the players that Matthew Stafford was surrounded with. He had 3 first-round pick tight ends: Brandon Pettigrew, Eric Ebron, and T.J. Hawkinson. Right? He was surrounded by those guys. He had Calvin Johnson. He had Nate Burleson. He had Golden Tate. He had Danny Amendola. He had Kenny Golladay. He had Marvin Jones. He had all those guys. And I'm sorry, but there have been a lot worse supporting casts in the NFL than what Stafford has.
The offensive line has been okay.
And the offensive line, Taylor Decker's a first-round pick. Frank Ragnow's a first-round pick. Riley Reif's a first-round pick.
The recasting of Matthew Stafford as this poor unfortunate who never had any help around him is kind of wild. I think there's definitely an argument that the way he plays the game, in terms of when things break down, he can make some special things happen, paired with a guy who can raise the baseline of any quarterback, is an intriguing concept for does the sum of that become better than either one of them on their own?
Because in Detroit, people gave...
But we have to be honest that Matthew Stafford did not just do all this by himself in Detroit. He had some help around him.
I mean, Kirk Cousins' record as a starting quarterback for the Vikings was 4 games over 500 if it wasn't for Stafford. The problem is, I think, the comeback is always they never had a running game, right?
Sure.
Like the one year they had Reggie Bush rush for 1,000 yards. They had couple 100-yard games. But the fact of the matter is, Stafford was part of the reason he needed all those comeback wins. Stafford was part of the reason they got behind and they couldn't run the football.
And I always wondered how much of that was an intentional choice anyway. Like, look, Matthew Stafford is here. He's the guy that's supposed to be the amazing quarterback. Why would we be...
Well, especially in 2011.
Why would we be handing the ball off to some stiff in the backfield who's not really bringing much to the table?
Especially in 2011, right? Where you look at the league-wide environment. 2009 was when he was drafted. This was before the CBA. You're paying those number one overall picks a ton of money, right? And then 2009, he plays like half the season. 2010, he plays hardly any of the season. So you got to 2011, and actually the team like won their last 4 games with Sean Hill in 2010. Like they had a decent roster. They had an easy schedule. And it's like, okay, the clock's ticking. It's time to start winning with this first overall pick that we're paying a ton of money to. Like it was a different league-wide environment then. And you're right, they threw all the time. They threw all the time because they were put in positions to throw all the time by the guy who's the most important player on the team, which was him.
You have always sounded sort of quite critical about this idea of, all of the Rams' resources on defense. It's like tied up in Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald, right?
Yeah.
And I think your point, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but is that this idea of like, if you tie all of this to 2 superstars, there's no depth anywhere. If you lose one of these guys, you're screwed, right? Which is just a bad way of building a defense.
Sam, what is the Rams' record last year if they're merely the 8th best defense in the NFL?
Probably not great at all. Like it's
7-9.
Yeah.
Right? Like last year. So I talked about this on the show. Maybe we were talking about this before, but like, I feel like we're all handicapping the 2020 versions of a lot of these teams.
Yeah.
If you would have taken last year's Rams team with the number one defense already baked in to everything you're talking about, and you insert Stafford, they're probably competing for the NFC, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, we saw it even in the divisional round against Green Bay. You take Donald off that team for 25 snaps in the second half, and they can't stop anybody.
Right. But do you think that there's merit in building a defense around a couple of superstars rather than trying to get good across the board?
I think there's nothing wrong with having superstars. Like, there's no reason they should trade Donald.
Because they've done it in such a way that it's not even just that they have 2 really good players.
Yeah.
Like, the scheme hangs around those 2 guys. Like, Ramsey doesn't just do what he does, and that's great. Ramsey makes the next 2 guys in the depth chart better. Like, you're getting career years out of Troy Hill and Darius Williams because of what Ramsey allows you to do with the coverage. And Donald, the same thing. Like, everybody that gets plugged in as an edge rusher has a 10, 15 sack season because they're lining up next to Aaron Donald, and they're going to get 5 sacks just from a dude be running away from him.
And I think that's actually a good way. If you're going to be a stars and scrubs team, have everything leveraged on your stars.
Right, which is what they're doing.
The problem is that everything that was good about the team last year, except for the 2 stars, it's not guaranteed that that's going to be the same.
Sure.
Raheem Morris doesn't have the same intuition about Brandon Staley's defense that Brandon Staley has, by definition. They lose John Johnson. They lose Troy Hill. They're a little weaker back there by definition. They've never cared about linebackers, which I think is pretty woke anyway. But again, like, there are teams that could exploit them, right? And yeah, you're not going to get Leonard Floyd's 2020 season in 2021. I just think that's regression. But even then, and I'm not saying it's going to be a drastic drop, but that's why I said if they're merely the 8th best defense last year, what is their record? Because if you're telling me the Rams even stay the same, and they have designs of wanting to be better, if the Rams even stay the same, Stafford has to cover that spread, which is 8th best defense. What they would have been last year,
right?
And to me, that's the tough part. And I think just even we haven't talked about any really games this weekend, but I think that's a sneaky game this weekend to monitor, which is Indianapolis, who's very much a very physical team against a Rams defense that beats you with finesse, right? It beats you with the mind games. I think Indianapolis could run the football on the Rams and control this game in a way that the Bears tried to the other day and had some success with David Montgomery, but weren't able to finish with Andy Dalton. Carson Wentz could be just another Andy Dalton, so it might just be mute anyway. But
the way they hinging the entire defense around those superstars, though, to me is it's an interesting way of building a team. I'm not sure it's wrong. Like, I'm not sure it's bad just because it's fragile if somebody gets hurt. to me, I kind of buy into that Tom Moore quote that I have as my pinned tweet, which is, Gruden once asked Tom Moore why Peyton's backups didn't get more reps, to which Tom Moore answered, fellas, if 18 goes down, we're fucked. We don't practice fucked.
Yeah.
I like that, right? Like, why? There's no point in upgrading from Jim Sorgi, because if Jim Sorgi has to come in the game, if Peyton Manning isn't your quarterback, you're not winning games. So what's the point? But if Aaron Donald is not in the lineup, the whole season's gone. Blow it up.
I think the difference, though, is even though Ramsey and Donald are extremely valuable, they're still an order of magnitude different than the QB.
Sure, yeah, that's true.
So it's. I mean, you're talking about fractions of a win on average.
But the defense is built with the understanding that those two were in there.
Yeah.
I'm not, just because there isn't depth beyond those guys, I don't hate that too much.
But around the defense, though, like, is there a smart offense that can work around Jalen Ramsey?
Definitely, in terms of, like, you can minimize the effect that Jalen Ramsey directly has on what you're doing. But I think the way they build a defense, it's very hard to eradicate the indirect effect that he's having.
Yeah, no, for sure. But like we saw in the NFC divisional round, even with just one wide receiver, which I thought was a weakness that Green Bay would have going into that game, they were able to mitigate the effect of Ramsey in coverage. I agree that this is probably a good strategy in a league where 10 wins gets you to the playoffs, because there are that many kind of like negative EV offensive coordinators. Like, they'll get to play Todd Downing. Like, right. So like that'll work, but if you're trying to win a championship, and I think the Rams are really trying to win a championship, the hard thing is, especially now where there's only one bye, you really don't get a shot at, the bye if you lose a couple games during the season.
Right.
Like, they might like, I think they're built to where if everything goes right, they're going to be an amazing team. I think that they're not necessarily built to withstand perturbations the way that maybe some other more anti-fragile teams are.
Last team I want to hit on, because when we started doing this preview show on Sunday, you made me completely rethink my whole outlook on the Washington football team, which I'd been kind of positive on heading into the season, And you said that the problem is that you're effectively handicapping last year's team. You're saying, well, they were here, and then they added this upgraded quarterback, and they've gotten a little bit better maybe on the back end with William Jackson coming in.
Very much.
And you add that to last year, and you're in good shape. Problem is, this isn't last year's team. Nobody else is running with last year's team either, and their strength of schedule this year is brutal, and they're not going to be as good as they were last year overall.
Here are the teams that Washington beat last year in their quarterbacks: Carson Wentz, Andy Dalton, Ben DiNucci. Joe Burrow knocked out for Ryan Finley. Andy Dalton again. Ben Roethlisberger, Nick Mullins in Arizona, and Jalen Hurts / Nate Sudfeld. In the playoff game against Tampa Bay, everybody remembers how well Taylor Heineke played, and we should. It was fun. They gave up 507 yards, and that was the most they gave up all season. And that was despite the fact that Chris Godwin dropped like 8 passes in that game. So, like, and interestingly enough, in this past week 1, when they faced the Los Angeles Chargers, the Chargers tried to charger the hell out of that game. Like, how many teams have a game where the quarterback's arm is literally going forward?
That's one of the most absurd
the ball's tipped out a little bit.
He life.
Throws it through the back of the end zone, and they call it a touchback.
He threw a 30-yard fumble.
Exactly. And, I mean, good on Herbert. I tweeted this out, but Chargers receivers this past week had the second highest rate of contested targets, meaning that Washington actually did a good job, or conversely, Herbert was right. They were not getting open enough for Herbert, and it still didn't matter. Like, Washington actually performed well in some key performance indicators during that game, and it just didn't work. And now they got a nice one here on Thursday against the Giants, the 3.5-point favorites, even with their backup playing. But after that, you have Josh Allen, Matt Ryan, now Flamus Winston, Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Teddy Bridgewater, and Tom Brady in succession in a row. You have the worst quarterback in all of those games. And like, people always talk about their end schedule. at Raiders, which shouldn't be easy, and actually the at Raiders is after a Monday night against Seattle. So that they also have schedule difficulties where they face a lot of teams off byes, and they have the 6-day turnaround before they go to Vegas. But after that, they have home to Cowboys, at Eagles, at Cowboys, at Washington, and at New York. So the last 5 games are against NFC East teams, which many of them will be bad. The problem is if you bet them over 8.5, I think the most likely record they have going into that is 3-9. So like you're still screwed. So that was always my handicap on them, was that A, they're fragile. I saw Fitzpatrick's already hurt.
Right.
But also they have a murderer's row. Like they have their schedule, and now that you face 3 teams with the same finish as you outside your opponents with 17 games, it was just never in the cards for them, I don't think.
How powerful to you is like strength of schedule before a season? Like if you just looked at a team and said, all right, I have a vague idea of where all these teams are. Now let's look at their strength of schedule. If that's how you worked, how close would you be to how things are going to pan out?
It's important, and you can't just use wins and losses from last year. You have to use like either the betting market information or an ELO system, or whatever we use. Like it's super important. It's one of the reasons why San Francisco was given one of the highest chances to win the Super Bowl, because they had the easiest strength of schedule going into the year. But the other thing to look at, and it's important, is to look at sort of the other information, like how many teams do you play coming off of a bye? How many times who do you play when you come off a bye? Here's a sneaky one for Carolina, and it's why even though I don't like them, I'm not a fan of a lot of what they do. But I didn't bet their under this offseason. Carolina has some sneaky, like easy aspects of their schedule. They don't face any team off a bye. I believe, I have to go back. Don't fact check me there. But even like week 3, they face a rookie quarterback a rookie head coach on Thursday Night Football. Like that has always been a historical edge, where that's the first time that guy's ever coached in those 3-day turnaround circumstances, and you get one of those. Like that's so Atlanta had a lot of those. Atlanta and Washington, teams like that, have bad versions of those.
Right.
Teams like Carolina have easier versions of those, and that kind of stuff can. If you're thinking about betting a win total going into the preseason, those kind of things can give you a little bit of a pause.
All right, that'll do it, Eric. Thanks very much for filling in for Steve. I like the way I get rid of Steve and I still get baseball references. That I can't.
What did I say? Baseball.
You were talking about was it the GM of the San Francisco Giants?
Oh yeah.
Can't escape him. So anyway, Eric is the co-host of the PFF Forecast. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find their videos there. If you're not, you'll find their podcast anywhere you listen to your podcasts. I will be back tomorrow. I have no idea whether Steve will be back tomorrow, or if not, who's going to be in the chair opposite. But tune in anyway and see what we talk about. We'll be previewing all of Week 2's games, even if I have to do it solo. So thanks for listening. Thank you. Huge thanks for Dr. Eric Eager. See you later.